and good morning. All right, so we're going to do a story today, and the two work text pages that go with it, I'm going to help you with those. So you will not have an assignment after today, after this lesson. So I want you to pay close attention. This is a kind of a sad story, but it's one that has a very good message behind it. So it's called The Cherry Trees. All right, so before we begin, let's look at our vocabulary words. I built a clubhouse on the strongest bough of the tree. What's the bough of a tree? It's like a branch. When the fragile vase fell, it broke into many pieces. What's fragile mean? Very, very tender, something that's very breakable. The raindrops were prickling my arms, so I put on a jacket. What does prickling mean? Well, you felt rain kind of falling on you and just kind of feels like it's beep, 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 like that, and kind of agitates us. The tall man was stooping down to talk with the little boy. Stooping means to just bend over, like you're going to pick something up. You stoop over to pick it up. It's kind of a silly word, isn't it? Okay. So let's look at our page in our reader book. It's on page 169. It's just a one-part story. And I'm going to read it, but I need you to follow along with me, just like you're reading on your own, okay? Now, this story today is about a girl named Karis. It looks like Charis, but I believe it's pronounced Karis. She's going through a very difficult struggle. And so her dad uses a comparison to explain these important characteristics of God that will help her through this time. So anyway, let's go ahead and look at the page, and I'm going to go ahead and begin to read. As I read, make sure you're following along just like you're reading, okay? And I want you to notice how Karis and her family respond to the unwanted news, okay? I remember the day I found out about Grandma. The bus had brought me home from school early because of the snowstorm, and Dad was sitting on the kitchen table holding Mom's hand. Dad never came home this early in the day. I knew that something had happened. Sit down, Karis, Mom said. She poured me a cup of hot cocoa, and when she brought it in to me, she stayed behind me with her hands on my shoulders. Sweetheart, Dad said, we have some sad news for you. He looked down at the coffee cup in his big, rough hands. Your grandma died today. For a moment, he just sat without speaking. Then he looked up at me, and crinkles around his eyes were back. But the good news is, Grandma is with Jesus now. Grandma had been in the hospital for a long time, but before that, she had lived at our house. Mom and Dad told me about the things she had said in her hospital bed right before she died. Then they talked about funeral arrangements. Nothing could be done until the storm was over, Dad said. I just sat and drank my cocoa and listened. I didn't eat much for supper. Darkness came early, and I brought a chair to the kitchen window and sat there where I could look out. In the dim light, I could just see the snow falling on the cherry trees outside. Behind me, I'm not crying, I promise. Behind me, on the table, a candle flame danced, making a bright spot of fire in the pane. If this storm keeps up, Dad said, we could lose some of those trees. I turned around. Why? He leaned close to me, peering out the window over my head. Their limbs aren't strong enough to hold the heavy snow, he said. Much more of this, and the branches will crack beneath the weight. I watched the snow, wondering how something so lovely and soft could be so deadly at the same time. Everything dies, I thought, and God just lets it happen. Remember how your grandma loved those cherry trees in the spring, Karis? Mom said, with all the white blossoms on them. If we do lose them, I'm glad she's not here to see it. And then I tried to ask Mom why God would let the trees die, but I started to cry. Mom put her arms around me. She kept holding me, even when the sobs made me jerk and tremble. When I was finally able to be silent, we just watched the snow together. The next morning, when I got up, the sun was shining on the clean, white world. I ran straight to the kitchen. Mom turned from the stove where she was frying eggs and smiled at me. "No school for you today," she said. I looked out at the cherry trees. Just before I had gone to bed the night before, I had prayed that God would not let the snow break the trees. And now, here they were, all standing tall. Each branch was coated with a layer of snow like thick frosting on dark cakes. But not many branches had fallen, only a few of the smaller ones. Dad was busy on the phone for most of the morning, calling my aunts and uncles and making plans for Grandma's funeral. I helped Mom sort through some of Grandma's things in the room where she had stayed. In the afternoon, I went outside and built a snowman under the cherry trees. I used some of the fallen twigs for the snowman's arms, and I made him smile with pieces of gravel from the drive. Dad came out for a while to see my snowman. "Good work, Karis," he said. He put an arm around my shoulders while we smiled back at the smiling white man. Dad reached over our heads and touched a cherry bough. "The Lord spared our trees," he said. "Dad," I shivered and took a deep breath. My voice came out sounding rushed. "Why did God let us keep trees but not Grandma? I prayed we could keep both." I couldn't look up at him. I just kept staring at my snowman, but I was no longer smiling. "I don't know, Karis," Dad said, "but I do know that God did what he knew was best." He thought for a moment. Then he broke another twig off the cherry tree and handed it to me. "See how small that is? How fragile?" I turned the little twig over in my mittened hands. "We're like that sometimes," Dad said. "When we've had heavy burdens to bear, or when we've been in a lot of pain, we can grow pretty weak and frail. Grandma was like that." I nodded, knowing what he meant. Right before she had gone to the hospital, Grandma could not even stand up without help. "And sometimes when that happens," Dad said, "God decides it's time to release us from the suffering altogether. He takes the burden away." "You mean dying?" I asked. "Sometimes it's dying. And sometimes, like with the trees, God heals. Either way, he knows how much we can handle, and he knows when we've had enough. But how does he choose dying or living? A whisper of wind stirred the cherry boughs above us, and a little dusting of snow sprinkled down. I looked up at Dad, and he smiled at me. "He chooses," he said, "because he knows what is right. That's why he is God." I wanted to be able to smile too, but as I looked at Dad, I suddenly remembered the photograph of Grandma on the desk in my room, and the rocking chair by my bed where she had sat and read to me. The photograph was all I had of her, and the chair was empty now. "What about the people who get left with the pain?" I asked. I felt tears prickling in my eyes. What if God doesn't take it away? Instead of answering, Dad took the twig from my hand. Stooping down in the snow, he used the twig as a pencil to write my name. "Karis, do you remember what your name means?" he asked. "Of course I remember, Dad. Dad had told me many times that he had me after a Greek word in the Bible. Grace," I said. "That's right. And that's your answer. For the people who get left with the pain, God gives his grace." "What's grace exactly?" I wiped my mitten across my eyes. Dad looked far away for a moment, thinking. Then he looked back at me. "It's like little gifts of strength," he said. "Not all at once, just enough for each day. It means becoming like these tree branches when they're able to bend under the snow, but not break. Do you understand?" I looked at my name in the snow for a long time. Then I looked at him, and I suddenly found I could smile. "I think so." Dad gave me a hug, then he took my hand, just like he used to when I was very little, and led me back toward the farmhouse. "I guess we can thank God for leaving us the trees," I said. He gave my hand a squeeze. "We sure can, sweetheart. There'll be blossoms again in the spring." I thought for a moment. "And cherry pies," I added. I looked up at Dad in time to see his eyes crinkle when he grinned. "That's my Karis," he said. Kind of a sad story, isn't it? But it's still a needed story, I think. It does talk a lot about God's grace, and I've lost people in my life that I loved, and I never questioned God. But I've been a Christian since I was 7, and I never questioned when God took someone away, but I've only had a couple of people that were pretty close to me. But my parents are alive. All of my grandparents are dead now. And I do miss them. but I never questioned why God took them. And sometimes I think about young people who die, and God has decided to take them from this world for whatever reason. You know, sometimes I bet your mom or your dad or your grandparents, they give you rules. And you think, in your mind, you think, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Why would they make that rule? That's the dumbest rule ever. Well, they know something that you don't know. And that's why they've made that rule. It's kind of the same thing with how God does that. And He gives us the grace that we need. It's because He knows things that we don't yet know. And so that's why He has things happen that way. So anyway, I'm not going to go back through the story and ask you questions about different things. I think the story kind of told itself, and I don't think we need to do the questions. So let's go ahead and move on to our work text pages. How about that? Let's look at work text page 71. We have 71 and 72. They're short lessons today, but these are things that I want to go over with you, and I don't want to grade these. So on page 71, we're going to identify the characters from the story. Now, there was, let me go ahead and let's see, we're going to add, actually, let's go ahead and do this. We're going to add a list here of the characters in the story. I do not like it to be red. I don't know why it's always defaulted to red, but it is. That's okay. Okay, now, well, maybe today, perhaps, there we go. So we have Dad, Mom, and Karis. That's pretty much all of, well, we did have, I guess we probably should consider Grandma because it talked about her. She wasn't an active character, but we'll consider her. So we have Dad, Mom, Karis, and Grandma. Those are the characters in the story. Those are the only characters in the story. I would say Karis is probably the main character. Now what we're going to do is we're going to read each sentence and we're going to find the character from the story who fits those words or actions, and we're going to write their name. Now you see the very center of the page where it says Karis's family, and then it has arms and things, lines that kind of reach out. Okay, so let's read the pink box. But the good news is Grandma is with Jesus now. And then there's another box that goes with kind of a brown box, and it says, stooping down in the snow, he used a twig as a pencil to write Karis's name. Well, that's pretty easy because it says he, but it's Dad. So write Dad in that blank right there. Okay, let's go over to the right. And there's a dark orange box and a yellow box connected to an empty box. So the orange one says, she loved those cherry trees in the spring with all the white blossoms. And the yellow one, people can grow pretty weak and frail. She was like that. That would be Grandma. So you'll write Grandma in that blank. Okay, let's go back over here to the left-hand side. There's kind of a purple box and then a blue box. Let's read those and see what character that's talking about. Why did God let us keep the trees but not Grandma? In the blue box, I looked at my name in the snow for a long time and suddenly found I could smile. That would be Karis. So you'll write Karis in that blank. All right, and now to the right in the corner, there's a purple and kind of an orangey brownish box. She poured Karis a cup of hot cocoa, and she put her arms around Karis and held her even when the sobs made Karis jerk and tremble. Of course, it's the only one we have left, and that was Mom. So that's kind of naming the characters in there. All right, look at page 72 then. Now, this one is something that may be a little bit new to you. You may have studied it once or twice before, but we're going to go over it just a little bit. Now, stories can be told in different points of view. Now, I don't know if you've ever read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, each one of those tells about the life of Christ, and it tells basically the same stories or accounts. I don't like to use the word stories. It tells the same accounts, but from different points of view. So let's give an example. If you and a cousin or a sister or brother, or you and someone went to the fair, and you came back home and someone said, can you tell me about it? What kinds of things did you do? Well, you were with that person all day long, but you're both going to have completely different points of view. Even though you saw the same things, you might have done the same things, you may have eaten the same things, but you're both going to have different stories, right? That's a different point of view, kind of a different point of view. So stories can be told that way. Now, look at the top of page 72, those bright yellow ovals. A story that's told by one of the characters is called a first person story. In other words, one of the characters that's in the story is telling the story. And they'll use pronouns like I, me, my, we, our, us. And those types of words, pronouns, helps you determine who's telling the story from what point of view. So a character in the story that's telling the story, and they use those pronouns, lets you know that it's first person. Now, it says to choose one. Read each paragraph and circle the first person pronouns I, me, my, we, and our, and then determine if the paragraph is written in first person, and then circle the answer. Okay? Now, I remember the day I found out, now as I read, you circle the pronouns. I found out about Grandma. The bus had brought me home from school early because of the snowstorm, and Dad was sitting at the table holding Mom's hand. Dad never came home this early in the day. I knew that something had happened. Did you circle all the pronouns? There's I, there's 3 I's and 1 me. Now, is this short little story in first person? Yes, because it's got those pronouns in it and a character in the story is telling the story. Okay? Now, I want you to pause this and I want you to finish the other 3. When you're done, turn it back on and we'll see if you got those right. Did you finish the other 3? All right, the one to the right, the one at the top on the right-hand side, is it first person? Yes. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pronouns in there. The one on the bottom on the left is no, it is not first person. There are no pronouns in there that go with first person, is it? And the one on the bottom right is, yes, a first person story, and there's 3 pronouns in there. Okay, so don't forget, first person point of view is a character in the story telling the story. Okay, that will be all of your lesson for today.